The stagecoach rattled to a halt, dust billowing around the wooden wheels, as Katherine Reynolds clutched her worn leather suitcase to her chest. At 35, the lines around her eyes told stories of laughter and tears in equal measure. But today, they were creased with anxiety as she stepped down onto the main street of Promise Creek, Colorado, in the spring of 1875. "Last stop, madam," the driver called, tipping his hat before tossing down her trunk. Katherine smoothed her travel-worn dress and took a deep breath. After exchanging letters for 6 months with Albert Winters, a shopkeeper seeking a bride, she had finally arrived. Albert had seemed eager in his correspondence, mentioning how he needed a sensible woman to help with his store and provide companionship in his advancing years. She had been honest about her age, though perhaps not emphasizing it, and he had seemed unbothered in his letters. The town of Promise Creek sprawled before her, a collection of wooden buildings with false fronts lining the dusty main street. A saloon with swinging doors stood across from the general store, while a small white church sat at the far end. It wasn't Denver or St. Louis, but after years as a schoolteacher in Ohio, Katherine had yearned for change, for a chance at the family she'd never had while caring for her ailing parents until their passing. She spotted a portly man in a neat suit standing in front of the general store, checking his pocket watch repeatedly. His graying hair was combed meticulously to one side, and his mustache twitched with nervous energy. This must be Albert. Gathering her courage, Katherine approached him with what she hoped was a becoming smile. "Mr. Winters, I'm Katherine Reynolds." The man's eyes widened as he looked her up and down, his expression shifting from anticipation to unmistakable disappointment. "Miss Reynolds, but you're—" He trailed off, clearing his throat uncomfortably. "I mentioned I was 35 in my letters," Katherine said, her smile faltering. Albert's face flushed. "Well, yes, but I had assumed, that is to say." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Miss Reynolds, I was expecting someone more youthful. A woman who might still bear children." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow. She had known this was a risk, that many men seeking mail-order brides wanted young women, but Albert's letters had suggested he valued companionship and help with his business over youth and beauty. "I see," she said quietly, struggling to maintain her dignity as people on the street began to cast curious glances their way. "I'm terribly sorry for the misunderstanding," Albert continued, not meeting her eyes, "but I don't believe this arrangement will work. I've already paid for your passage, of course, so consider that a gift. Perhaps you could find work here or continue on to another town." With that, he tipped his hat awkwardly and retreated into his store, leaving Katherine standing alone on the boardwalk, her trunk and suitcase at her feet and the curious stares of townspeople burning into her back. For a moment, she considered climbing back onto the stagecoach and returning east. But the coach was already pulling away, and besides, she had spent nearly all her savings on this journey. There was nothing to go back to. Her parents' home had been sold to pay their medical debts, and her teaching position had been filled. As the reality of her situation settled over her, Katherine felt tears threatening. She blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in the middle of the street in a strange town. She had her pride, if little else. "Madam, you look like you could use some help with that trunk." The deep voice startled her. Katherine turned to find a tall man regarding her with kind eyes the color of a summer sky. His face was tanned and weathered beneath the brim of his wide cowboy hat, with laugh lines fanning from the corners of his eyes. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his face, a quiet strength and genuine concern that made her instinctively trust him. "Yes, thank you," she managed, trying to compose herself. The man lifted her trunk with ease. "Name's Daniel Morgan. I've got a wagon just down the way." "Where are you headed?" Katherine hesitated, the humiliation of her situation washing over her anew. "I'm afraid I don't know. I was expected, but there's been a change of plans." Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes as he glanced toward the general store. "Albert Winters?" he asked quietly. Katherine nodded, mortified. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "Miss Reynolds, Katherine Reynolds." Miss Reynolds, Promise Creek's a decent town with decent folk, despite what you might be thinking right now. If you need a place to stay, Mrs. Abernathy runs a respectable boarding house 3 streets over. I'd be happy to take you there." Relief flooded through Katherine. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Morgan. Daniel, please," he said with a small smile. "I've never been much for formalities." As they walked to his wagon, Katherine felt the weight of stairs following them. No doubt by nightfall, everyone in Promise Creek would know about the mail-order bride who was deemed too old by Albert Winters. Daniel seemed to sense her discomfort. "Don't mind them," he said. Small towns run on gossip, but they forget quick enough when something new comes along. "Are you from Promise Creek originally?" Katherine asked, grateful for the distraction of conversation. Daniel helped her onto the wagon seat before climbing up beside her. "No, madam. Came here about 8 years ago from Texas. Bought land outside town and started ranching. Nothing fancy, but it's a good life." As they rode, Daniel pointed out landmarks: the schoolhouse, the doctor's office, the small newspaper building. Katherine found herself relaxing slightly in his company. There was nothing presumptuous about him, just a natural ease that seemed to say he was comfortable in his own skin. Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house was a 2-story white clapboard building with green shutters and a wide front porch adorned with rocking chairs. The woman herself appeared on the porch as they approached, a plump, gray-haired woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Daniel Morgan, twice in 1 week. To what do I owe the pleasure?" she called. "Mrs. Abernathy, this here is Miss Katherine Reynolds. She's looking for a room if you've got one available." The older woman's gaze swept over Katherine, taking in her travel-worn appearance and the trunk Daniel was unloading. Understanding flickered in her eyes, but she merely smiled and said, "Indeed I do." "Come in, dear, you must be exhausted from your journey." As Katherine followed Mrs. Abernathy inside, Daniel set her trunk in the entryway. "Miss Reynolds," he said, tipping his hat, "if you find yourself in need of anything, most folks in town can direct you to my ranch." "It's been a pleasure meeting you, despite the circumstances." "Thank you, Mr. Morgan Daniel," Katherine replied. "Your kindness has meant more than you know." After he left, Mrs. Abernathy showed Katherine to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Bathrooms down the hall, meals are at 7, noon, and 6, she explained. "It's $2 a week, including meals." Katherine's heart sank. At that rate, her remaining money would last less than a month. "Mrs. Abernathy, I wonder if you know of any work available in town." "I was a school teacher back in Ohio." The older woman studied her thoughtfully. "Our schoolmarm, Miss Perkins, is getting married next month and moving to Denver with her husband-to-be. Town council's been looking for a replacement. Course, there's others interested, but if you've got experience." Hope flickered in Katherine's chest. "I taught for 15 years. "Well then," Mrs. Abernathy said with a decisive nod, "you should speak with Mayor Jenkins first thing tomorrow. His office is next to the bank." That night, Katherine lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the distant piano music from the saloon down the street. She had come west seeking a new beginning, a chance at the family she'd always wanted but had sacrificed for duty. Instead, she found herself alone in a strange town, judged too old at 35 to be worthy of marriage. She thought of Daniel Morgan's kindness, the way he had stepped forward when she needed help with no expectation of reward. There had been no pity in his eyes, just genuine concern. It was a small comfort in a day filled with humiliation, but Katherine clung to it as she drifted into an exhausted sleep. Morning brought renewed determination. Katherine dressed in her best remaining outfit, a navy blue skirt and white blouse with her mother's cameo pinned at the throat. After a hearty breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and coffee in Mrs. Abernathy's dining room, she set out for the mayor's office. Mayor Jenkins was a thin, balding man with spectacles perched on his nose and an air of perpetual distraction. He listened as Katherine outlined her qualifications, occasionally asking questions about her teaching methods and experience. "Well, Miss Reynolds," he said when she had finished, "you certainly seem qualified, but I should be frank, the school term ends in 3 weeks for summer." "We wouldn't need you to start until September." Katherine's heart sank. "I see." The mayor seemed to sense her disappointment. "The town pays $30 a month during the school year, with lodging included. There's a small house behind the schoolhouse." but that doesn't help you now, does it? No, sir, Katherine admitted. Mayor Jenkins drummed his fingers on his desk. Tell you what, I'll speak to the council about hiring you for the fall term. In the meantime, Mrs. Peterson at the dress shop mentioned needing help, and Doc Bailey's always looking for someone with a steady hand to assist with his paperwork. Neither would pay much, but it might tide you over until school starts. Relieved, Katherine thanked him and headed for the dress shop. Mrs. Peterson, a thin woman with nimble fingers and a practical manner, was indeed looking for help. I can pay 75 cents a day, she offered. Hours are 8 to 5, 6 days a week. Can you sew? Yes, though I'm not as skilled as a professional seamstress, Katherine admitted. You'll learn, Mrs. Peterson said with a brisk nod. When can you start? Tomorrow. Good. Be here at 8 sharp. As Katherine left the dress shop, her spirits lifted for the first time since her arrival. She had employment, at least temporarily, and the promise of a teaching position in the fall. It wasn't the life she had imagined when she boarded the train in Ohio, but it was a start. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she nearly collided with a man leaving the general store, Albert Winters. He stopped short, his face reddening. Miss Reynolds, he said stiffly. I see you've decided to stay in Promise Creek. Katherine lifted her chin. Yes, Mr. Winters, in fact, I'll be teaching at the school come fall. Surprise flickered across his face. Well, that's good news, I suppose. An awkward silence stretched between them. Finally, Albert cleared his throat. Miss Reynolds, about yesterday, there's no need to explain, Mr. Winters, Katherine interrupted, unwilling to endure further humiliation. We both made assumptions, let's leave it at that. He nodded, seeming relieved to be spared the conversation. Good day, then. As he hurried away, Katherine caught sight of Daniel Morgan further down the street, leading a horse to the blacksmith's. He looked up and saw her, raising a hand in greeting. Without thinking, Katherine walked toward him. Miss Reynolds, he said, a smile warming his features. How are you settling in? Quite well, thank you, she replied. I've secured employment at the dress shop and may be teaching at the school come fall. That's fine news, Daniel said, genuine pleasure in his voice. Mrs. Peterson's a fair employer, and the children here could use a good teacher. The blacksmith called out from his forge, and Daniel nodded in acknowledgement. I should see to my horse. Rusty here threw a shoe on the way to town. He patted the chestnut gelding's neck. Perhaps I'll see you around town, Miss Reynolds. I'd like that, Katherine said, surprised at her own boldness. Over the next weeks, Katherine fell into a routine. Her days were spent at the dress shop, learning to create fashionable gowns under Mrs. Peterson's exacting guidance. The work was demanding but satisfying, and Katherine found herself enjoying the creative aspects of dressmaking she had never explored before. In the evenings, she would often sit on Mrs. Abernathy's porch, reading or talking with the other boarders, 2 elderly sisters who ran the town's hat shop, a young man who worked at the bank, and occasionally a traveling salesman passing through. Daniel Morgan appeared in town every few days, sometimes stopping by the dress shop to order new shirts or have a tear mended. Each time, he would chat with Katherine, asking about her day or sharing news from his ranch. There was never anything overtly flirtatious in his manner, just a genuine interest that Katherine found herself looking forward to. One afternoon, as Katherine was sweeping the shop after closing, she heard a knock at the door. Looking up, she saw Daniel standing outside, hat in hand. She opened the door, surprised. Mr. Morgan, Daniel, Mrs. Peterson has already left for the day. Actually, I came to see you, he said. I wanted to ask if you might join me for supper at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening. Katherine was taken aback. Supper. A hint of uncertainty crossed his face. If you'd rather not know, I'd be delighted, she said quickly, a flush warming her cheeks. The smile that lit his face made something flutter in her chest. I'll call for you at the boarding house at 6 then. That night, Katherine lay awake, wondering at the unexpected invitation. Was it merely neighborly kindness or something more? Daniel was clearly older than Albert had wanted, probably in his early 40s, with streaks of gray at his temples and lines etched by sun and weather on his face. But there was a vitality about him, a quiet strength that Katherine found increasingly attractive. The next evening, Katherine dressed with particular care in her best dress, a deep green that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. Mrs. Abernathy helped her arrange her hair, pinning the chestnut waves into a becoming style. Daniel Morgan's a good man, the older woman remarked as she worked. Keeps to himself mostly, but always ready to help when needed. Been wondering when he'd start courting again. Again. Katherine asked, curious despite herself. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. Lost his wife and child to fever about 12 years back before he came here. Some say that's why he left Texas, too many memories. Hasn't shown interest in any woman since, least not that I've heard. Katherine digested this information, understanding better the shadow that sometimes crossed Daniel's face when conversation turned to family. When Daniel arrived, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark vest, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, Katherine felt a flutter of nerves. This was not merely a friendly meal, it had the unmistakable air of a proper courtship. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Promise Creek, with white tablecloths and actual china instead of tin plates. Daniel held her chair and ordered for both of them with a quiet confidence that suggested he was more accustomed to social niceties than his cowboy appearance might indicate. "I hope you don't mind my presumption in asking you to dinner," he said, after the waiter had brought their soup. "I've enjoyed our conversations these past weeks, as have I," Katherine admitted, "though I confess I'm surprised by the invitation." Daniel's blue eyes held her steadily. "Why is that?" Katherine hesitated, then decided on honesty. "After what happened with Mr. Winters, I'd rather assume that men in Promise Creek would share his preferences for younger women." A frown creased Daniel's brow. "Albert's a fool," he said bluntly. "Begging your pardon for speaking ill of your former intended." "He was hardly that," Katherine said with a small laugh. "We exchanged letters for 6 months, hardly a grand romance. Still," Daniel said, "what he did was unkind and short-sighted." He took a sip of water, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "A woman's worth isn't measured in years, Miss Reynolds, but in character. And from what I've seen, you have that in abundance." The sincerity in his voice touched Katherine deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, "and please call me Katherine." The evening passed in pleasant conversation. Daniel told her about his ranch, 500 acres with a small herd of cattle, a vegetable garden, and an orchard he'd planted himself. Katherine shared stories of her teaching years, the children she'd watched grow up, the satisfaction of seeing a student grasp a difficult concept. As they walked back to the boarding house under a sky scattered with stars, Daniel offered his arm and Katherine took it, aware of his strength beneath the fabric of his sleeve. "I enjoyed this evening," he said as they reached Mrs. Abernathy's porch. "So did I," Katherine replied. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Daniel cleared his throat. "I wonder if you might like to see my ranch someday. Perhaps Sunday after church. I could bring the wagon," Katherine smiled. "I'd like that very much," he nodded, seeming pleased. "Sunday then." He hesitated, then took her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Katherine." That night, Katherine found herself revisiting every moment of their dinner, every word and glance. At 35, she had long ago resigned herself to spinsterhood, especially after caring for her parents had consumed her prime marrying years. To find herself being courted, and by a man like Daniel Morgan, was unexpected and thrilling, yet doubt crept in. What if, upon further acquaintance, he found her lacking? What if this was merely kindness or fleeting interest? Katherine had built a life of self-sufficiency and had come west prepared to be a wife, only to find herself establishing independence once again. To open her heart now seemed a risk greater than any she had taken before. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Katherine wore a simple blue dress and a straw bonnet to church, aware of curious glances as she sat beside Daniel in the small wooden pew. News traveled fast in Promise Creek, and her presence at Daniel Morgan's side was clearly noteworthy. After the service, as they stood chatting with neighbors, Katherine noticed Albert Winters watching them from across the churchyard, a perplexed expression on his face. She felt a small, uncharitable surge of satisfaction at his confusion. The ride to Daniel's ranch took nearly an hour, following a winding trail that led away from town and into rolling grasslands dotted with cottonwoods. As they crested a final hill, Daniel's home came into view, a substantial log house with a wide porch, a barn, and several outbuildings. A stream glinted in the sunlight, cutting through pastures where cattle grazed. "It's beautiful," Katherine said sincerely. Pride shone in Daniel's eyes. "Built most of it myself. Took years to get it just how I wanted." He helped her down from the wagon and led her to the house. Inside, it was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture, a large stone fireplace, and bookshelves that surprised Katherine with their variety of volumes. "You're a reader," she remarked, running her fingers along the spines: Shakespeare, Dickens, Thoreau, and many others. "When time allows," Daniel said. "Winter evenings especially, not much else to do when snow piles up." The tour continued through the house: a spacious kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a dining room with a table Daniel had crafted himself, 2 bedrooms upstairs. Everything was neat and well-maintained, though distinctly masculine in its simplicity. After showing her the house, Daniel led Katherine around the property, pointing out the orchard he'd planted: apple, pear, and cherry trees now beginning to bear fruit, and the vegetable garden where neat rows of plants were pushing up through the soil. "You've created something remarkable here," Katherine said as they sat on the porch later, drinking lemonade Daniel had prepared before her arrival. "It's a good life," he agreed. "Lonely at times, but good." His words hung in the air between them, an unspoken question. Katherine found herself imagining what it would be like to share this place with him, to make a home here. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel said quietly, "I never expected to want to share this place with anyone again. After Eliza and our son died, I thought that part of my life was over." Katherine's heart ached for his loss. "Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you were widowed. I'm so sorry." Daniel nodded, his eyes on the distant horizon. "Thomas was just 4. The fever took them both within days of each other. I couldn't stay in our home after that, couldn't bear the memories." "So you came here and started over," Katherine said softly. "Yes." He turned to look at her, his expression open and vulnerable. "I never thought I'd feel this way again, Katherine, but these past weeks, getting to know you, it's awakened something I thought was long dead." The honesty in his words touched her deeply. "Daniel," he held up a hand, "you don't need to say anything. I know this is sudden and you came here with different expectations. I just wanted you to know that I care for you and there's no rush. We can take our time." Katherine reached out and took his hand, her heart full. "Thank you for that. It means more than I can say." They spent the remainder of the afternoon talking, sharing stories of their pasts and tentative hopes for the future. As the sun began to set, Daniel drove her back to town, the silence between them comfortable and filled with possibility. Over the following weeks, their courtship continued. Daniel came to town more frequently, often joining Katherine for supper at the boarding house or taking her for rides in the countryside on Sunday afternoons. She met his friends, the blacksmith and his wife, the sheriff and his family, ranchers from neighboring properties, and slowly began to feel part of the community. The school board officially offered Katherine the teaching position for the fall, and she accepted eagerly. Mrs. Peterson expressed regret at losing her from the dress shop, but understood the draw of her true profession. As July blazed into August, Katherine moved from the boarding house to the teacher's cottage behind the schoolhouse, a small but charming 2-room structure with its own garden. Daniel helped her move, bringing furniture he had made himself: a rocking chair for the porch, bookshelves for her collection of books, a writing desk by the window. The evening after she had settled in, Daniel appeared at her door with a bouquet of wildflowers. "Housewarming gift," he said with a shy smile. Katherine invited him in for tea, aware that this was the first time they had been truly alone together, without Mrs. Abernathy's watchful presence or the eyes of the town upon them. As they sat on her small porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Daniel turned to her, his expression serious. "Katherine, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes, I know it hasn't been long, and I promised we'd take our time. But I find myself thinking of you constantly, wishing you were with me at the ranch, imagining a future together." He took her hand. I'm not asking for an answer today, but I want you to know that when you're ready, I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." Catherine's breath caught. Despite their growing closeness, she hadn't expected this so soon. "Daniel, you don't need to answer now," he repeated. "Just think about it. I know you came here expecting one life and found another. I don't want to rush you." Catherine looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the genuine affection that had grown between them. She had come west seeking marriage, it was true, but she had expected a practical arrangement, not the deep connection she felt with Daniel. "I will think about it," she promised. "And thank you for understanding that I need time." He nodded, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss before taking his leave. That night, Catherine sat by her window, watching the stars emerge one by one. She thought of the life she had imagined with Albert Winters, respectable, comfortable, but ultimately a partnership of convenience. What Daniel offered was so much more a chance at real love, at a life built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Yet fear held her back. She had reinvented herself in Promise Creek, established independence and respect. To marry would mean another transformation, another risk. And despite Daniel's obvious care for her, she couldn't help wondering if he truly saw her, or if she was merely a salve for his loneliness. The summer days passed in a flurry of preparation for the school year. Catherine cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, ordered books and supplies, and created lesson plans for students ranging from 5 to 16 years old. Daniel continued his courtship, never pressing for an answer to his proposal, but making his feelings clear in countless small ways, bringing fresh vegetables from his garden, helping repair a leak in her roof, sitting beside her in church each Sunday. One evening in late August, just a week before school was to begin, Catherine was startled by a knock at her door. Opening it, she found Albert Winters standing on her porch, hat in hand. "Miss Reynolds," he said nervously, "I wonder if I might have a word." Surprised, Catherine invited him in, curious about this unexpected visit. Albert perched awkwardly on the edge of her sofa. "I've come to apologize," he said without preamble. "My behavior when you arrived was inexcusable. I let shallow considerations override common sense, and I've regretted it ever since." Catherine was taken aback by his candor. "Mr. Winters, please let me finish," he said. "The truth is, I've watched you these past months. I've seen how you've integrated into our community, how the townspeople respect you, and I've seen your friendship with Daniel Morgan." A flash of irritation went through Catherine. "If you've come to warn me against Daniel—" No, Albert said hastily. "Quite the opposite. I've come to tell you that I was a fool, and Daniel Morgan is a fortunate man, I had hoped. That is, I wondered if perhaps you might consider giving me another chance." Catherine stared at him, astonished. "Another chance," Albert nodded eagerly. "I was wrong to judge you by your age. A woman of your character and intelligence would make an excellent wife, and my offer of marriage still stands if you would consider it." For a moment, Catherine was speechless. The irony of the situation was almost laughable. The man who had rejected her now seeking her hand, while she contemplated an offer from the man who had shown her kindness when she most needed it. "Mr. Winters," she said finally, "I appreciate your apology and your offer, but I must decline." His face fell. "Is it because of Morgan? Because I can offer you a comfortable life in town, a position of respect? It's not about what you can offer," Catherine interrupted gently. "It's about the fact that you couldn't see my worth until others did. That's not a foundation for marriage." Albert's shoulders sagged. "I suppose I deserve that." "It's not about what you deserve," Catherine said. "It's about what I deserve." After Albert left, Catherine sat in her rocking chair thinking. His offer had clarified something for her. She no longer cared about simply being married, about having the security and status that came with wifehood. She wanted more. She wanted love. The next day, Catherine rode to Daniel's ranch. He was working in the corral when she arrived, training a young horse. Seeing her, he quickly secured the animal and came to meet her, surprise and pleasure on his face. "Catherine, I wasn't expecting you." She smiled, suddenly nervous. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Never," he assured her, helping her down from her horse. "Is everything all right?" "Yes. I wanted to talk to you, and it seemed right to do it here." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You've been thinking about my proposal," Catherine nodded. Albert Winters came to see me yesterday. Daniel's expression darkened. What did he want? To apologize, and to ask me to marry him after all. Shock and something like fear crossed Daniel's face. I see. I refused, Katherine said quickly, but it made me realize something important. She took a deep breath. I came west looking for security, for a chance at family before it was too late. I thought that was all I could hope for at my age, but you've shown me that I was wrong. Hope began to replace the concern in Daniel's eyes. How so? You've shown me that love isn't bound by age or convention. That it can find us when we least expect it. She stepped closer to him. I love you, Daniel Morgan, and yes, I will marry you if the offer still stands. Joy transformed his face. It stands, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled her into his arms, his embrace strong and sure. I love you, Katherine Reynolds, more than I thought possible. Their kiss was tender and full of promise, the culmination of a journey neither had expected but both now embraced wholeheartedly. They were married in the Promise Creek Church on the last Saturday of August, just before the school term began. The entire town turned out for the celebration, even Albert Winters, who offered sincere congratulations with only a hint of regret in his eyes. Katherine moved to the ranch after the wedding, riding to town each day to teach and returning home each evening to share her day with Daniel. Their life together fell into a rhythm of shared work and quiet evenings, of passionate nights and peaceful mornings. Winter came, blanketing the ranch in snow, giving them long evenings by the fire to read aloud from Daniel's collection of books or simply talk, learning the contours of each other's minds as thoroughly as they had learned each other's bodies. Spring brought new calves to the herd and the prospect of the school year ending. One evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Daniel took Katherine's hand. I've been thinking, he said. This ranch has always felt too big for just me. Now with you here it feels right. But I wonder if maybe there's room for more. Katherine looked at him questioningly. More children, Daniel said softly. I know we're older than most parents starting out, but there are children who need homes. The orphanage in Denver always has more than they can handle. Tears sprang to Katherine's eyes. She had given up the dream of motherhood years ago, accepting that some dreams must be set aside. You'd want that, to adopt, Daniel nodded, his eyes full of love. I've seen you with your students. You were born to be a mother, Katherine. And I'd like the chance to be a father again. Katherine threw her arms around him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Yes, she whispered. Yes. That summer, they traveled to Denver and returned with two children, Sarah, a solemn 7-year-old with Daniel's blue eyes and a talent for drawing, and Michael, a rambunctious 5-year-old who took to ranch life as if born to it. The adjustment wasn't always easy, but with patience and love, they became a family. As the years passed, their family grew again when they took in twins whose parents had died in a flash flood, 10-year-old boys with matching grins and boundless energy. The ranch thrived, and Katherine continued teaching, eventually hiring an assistant so she could spend more time at home with their growing family. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Daniel turned to Katherine, his face lined but his eyes as bright as ever. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Coming west, everything that happened with Albert. Katherine shook her head, smiling as Sarah showed Michael how to make a daisy chain. How could I? If Albert hadn't rejected me, I might never have found you. Sometimes what seems like our worst moment is actually the beginning of our greatest blessing. Daniel pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. You are my greatest blessing, Katherine Morgan, and I thank God every day that Albert Winters was fool enough to think 35 was too old for love. Katherine laughed, leaning into his embrace. Love knows no age, she said softly. It only knows the heart. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come west seeking a husband and found instead a family, a community, and a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible. At 40, she felt more alive, more herself than she ever had at 20. Age, she had learned, was not an ending but a beginning, each year bringing new wisdom, new opportunities for joy, new chances to love and be loved in return. And in Daniel's arms, with their children's laughter filling the air, Katherine knew she had found a happiness that transcended all expectations, all conventions. She had found home. 10 years later, Katherine stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Daniel rode in from the fields with their eldest son, Michael, now 20. Sarah, at 22, was already married to the local doctor's son and expecting their first grandchild. The twins, James and Joseph, were 16 and working part-time at the livery stable in town while finishing their schooling. Katherine had retired from teaching 5 years earlier, though she still tutored children who needed extra help. These days, she divided her time between helping Daniel with the ranch accounts, tending her garden, and preparing for her new role as grandmother. At 50, the auburn in her hair had given way to silver, and lines mapped her face, evidence of laughter and occasional tears through the years. Daniel, now in his early 60s, moved more slowly than he once had, but his eyes still lit up when he saw her, still held the same love that had sustained them through drought and blizzard, through childish illnesses and teenage rebellions, through all the ordinary trials and joys of building a life together. As Daniel dismounted and came to join her on the porch, Katherine felt the familiar flutter in her heart that his presence always evoked, even after 15 years of marriage. "How was the north pasture?" she asked as he kissed her cheek. "Good grass this year. The new calves are thriving." He sat beside her on the porch swing, his shoulder touching hers. "Michael's thinking about college back east. He was asking about it on the ride back." Katherine nodded, unsurprised. Their son had always been curious, always hungered for knowledge beyond what Promise Creek could offer. "He'd do well. He has your determination," Daniel chuckled. "And your brains, thank goodness." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the prairie in golden light. In the distance, they could see the twins riding home from town, racing each other as they always did. "I got a letter from Albert today," Katherine said after a while. Albert Winters had eventually married a widow from Kansas City and moved there to help with her late husband's business. Over the years, a cautious friendship had developed between them, built on letters exchanged a few times a year. "How is the old fool?" Daniel asked, but there was no malice in his tone. Time had softened the memory of that early rejection. "Doing well. His stepson is taking over more of the business now, giving him time to travel. They're planning a trip to Europe next spring." Daniel shook his head, bemused. "Never thought Albert had that much adventure in him." Katherine smiled. "People can surprise you. Indeed they can," Daniel agreed, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "You've certainly surprised me, Katherine Morgan. I thought my life was set, my heart closed, until you stepped off that stagecoach. And I thought my chance for love had passed," Katherine replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I've never been so happy to be wrong." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, hand in hand, watching as stars appeared one by one in the vast western sky. Their life together hadn't always been easy. There had been droughts that threatened the ranch, illnesses that had left them sleepless with worry, disagreements that had tested their patience with each other. But through it all, their love had only deepened, like a river carving its essential path through solid rock. Katherine thought of the frightened, humiliated woman she had been that first day in Promise Creek, standing alone on the street with her dreams in tatters. If she could go back and whisper in that woman's ear, she would tell her that rejection was not an ending but a beginning, that the greatest love story of her life was just about to unfold, that a man would come along who would see not her age but her heart, her strength, her capacity for love. She would tell her that love knows no age, it only knows the soul. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, his voice gentle in the gathering darkness. Katherine squeezed his hand. "Just how fortunate we are. All those years ago, when Albert turned me away, I thought my last chance at happiness was gone. I couldn't see that it was actually just beginning." Daniel nodded, understanding as he always did. "Everything happens in its own time. We met when we were ready to truly see each other." As their children's voices drifted toward them from the barn, as the first evening star appeared above the cottonwoods, Katherine knew that some dreams, the best dreams, come true not in the way we expect, but in the way we need. She had traveled west seeking a husband and found instead a partner, a love that defied convention and transcended time. In Daniel's eyes, she had never been too old, too plain, too anything but exactly who she was meant to be: his match, his love, his Katherine. And in that knowledge, she had found a happiness beyond all expectation, a life richer and more fulfilling than any she could have imagined when she stepped off that stagecoach into the promise of a new beginning.